There are moments in life that do not arrive loudly, yet they carry an undeniable weight. A notification lights up your screen. A message appears at an unusual hour. A small but unexpected event interrupts your routine. On the surface, it looks ordinary, something you could easily dismiss and scroll past. But something inside you pauses. Your attention sharpens. Your breath changes just slightly. You sense that this moment is different. Not because of what happened, but because of how it landed. These interruptions are rarely dramatic. They do not always come with clarity or explanation. Often, they appear mundane, even inconvenient. Yet they arrive with a quiet authority, asking without words to be noticed, to be felt, to be taken seriously. They disrupt the autopilot we live on and pull us into awareness. And awareness, once awakened, is difficult to return from. This is not coincidence. It is not random timing. And it is not accidental that you notice. Many people receive the same notifications, experience the same events, or pass through similar moments. But not everyone feels the internal shift that follows. Not everyone senses that something deeper is unfolding beneath the surface. The difference is not intelligence status or spirituality. The difference is readiness. And readiness is almost always formed through endurance. The idea of being chosen has often been misunderstood. It has been distorted into something hierarchical, something that implies superiority or exclusion. But true selection is not about being better than others. It is about being prepared in ways others may not see or even recognize. It is about having lived through seasons that stripped you of illusion, ego, and shortcuts. It is about having stayed present through discomfort rather than escaping it. Those who are ready are rarely those who have lived the easiest lives. They are the ones who have learned to listen when life speaks quietly, the ones who have been shaped by pressure rather than destroyed by it, the ones who have learned patience not because it was comfortable, but because it was necessary. This is why awakening often begins with interruption. An interruption forces you out of momentum and into reflection. It breaks the illusion that everything is moving according to your plans. It creates a gap, a small space where awareness can enter, and in that space, questions arise. Why now? Why this? Why does this feel significant when it shouldn't? These questions are not meant to be answered immediately. They are meant to reorient you, to shift your posture from control to attentiveness, to move you from reaction to discernment. The core theme of moments like these is often misunderstood. People assume it is about gain money, opportunity, reward, or elevation. But the true purpose is rarely external. It is internal. This is not about money. It is about awakening. It is about testing. It is about transition. Awakening is not dramatic enlightenment. It is the slow realization that the way you have been living, thinking, or responding is no longer sufficient for where you are being led. It is the awareness that something old is losing relevance, even if you cannot yet name what is replacing it. Awakening often feels unsettling before it feels empowering. Testing follows awakening naturally. Once awareness is present, responsibility follows. Tests are not punishments. They are confirmations. They reveal what has truly been integrated versus what was only understood intellectually. Tests expose whether your endurance has produced wisdom or merely survival. Transition is the least visible stage, yet the most demanding. It is the space between what was and what will be. It does not offer immediate clarity or reassurance. It requires trust without full information. This is why transition often feels lonely, confusing, or slow. Yet it is precisely here that identity is refined. The interruption you experienced is not meant to impress you. It is meant to position you. It asks a simple but profound question. Will you remain asleep to deeper meaning? Or will you stay present long enough to understand what is being reshaped within you? Those who are truly chosen are not marked by external signs, but by internal responses. They do not rush to interpret every event as confirmation. They do not chase symbolism for comfort. Instead, they observe, they wait. They allow meaning to unfold rather than forcing conclusions. Endurance has trained them to do this. Endurance teaches you that not everything urgent is important and not everything quiet is insignificant. It teaches you that strength is not always loud and progress is not always visible. It teaches you to remain steady when clarity is delayed. Dot. This is why this moment found you. Dot. Not because you are above others, but because you have learned to remain standing when certainty was absent. Because you have stayed conscious through seasons where others numbed themselves. Because you have developed the capacity to carry transition without demanding immediate reward. Dot. This interruption is not asking for excitement. It is asking for honesty. Dot. It is inviting you to recognize that something is shifting not outside of you first, but within you. Your perception is changing. Your tolerance for noise is decreasing. Your sensitivity to alignment is increasing. These are not random developments. They are signals that you are moving into a new phase of awareness. Dot. This phase will not be sustained by adrenaline or urgency. It will be sustained by discernment, patience, and grounded trust. Dot. So pause here. Dot. Do not rush to label this moment. Do not overinterpret it. Let it do what it was designed to do. Interrupt you just enough to wake you up. Dot. What comes next will not be built on coincidence, but on readiness, refined through endurance. Dot. The message arrives without warning. A transfer notification, a brief alert, a number on a screen that appears out of sequence with your expectations. It interrupts the flow of your day, not dramatically, but distinctly. For a moment, your rhythm breaks. Your mind pauses. Something inside you notices the shift. Dot. What makes this moment significant is not the amount involved. It is the timing. It arrives at a point when you were not anticipating it, perhaps even when you had already accepted absence or delay. The disruption is subtle but deliberate. It pulls you out of routine and into attention. Dot. Normal rhythm is predictable. It allows us to move through life without reflection, but disruption creates awareness. It forces you to stop, even briefly, and acknowledge that something has entered your experience outside of your control or planning. That interruption is not meant to impress you. It is meant to awaken you. Dot. This is often how God works. Not with spectacle, but with precision. Not by overwhelming, but by interrupting just enough to be noticed. Dot. When God interrupts in this way, the interruption rarely demands an immediate response. There is no command attached, no clear instruction flashing alongside the alert. Instead, there is space. Space to notice. Space to feel. Space to recognize that something has shifted even if you cannot yet articulate what that shift means. Dot. This kind of interruption does not hijack your will. It invites your awareness. It does not force belief. It asks for attentiveness. The moment itself is small, but its impact lingers because it touches something deeper than logic. It reaches the place where intuition lives, the place that recognizes meaning before understanding forms. Dot. Many people mistake God's work for dramatic intervention. They expect thunder, unmistakable signs, or life-altering events that leave no room for doubt. But Scripture consistently shows a different pattern. God often speaks in ways that require stillness to perceive. A whisper rather than a shout. A nudge rather than a push. A subtle rearrangement rather than a complete collapse. Dot. This is why timing matters more than scale. Dot. If the same message had arrived during abundance, it might have blended into excess. If it had arrived during chaos, it might have been dismissed as noise. But it arrived when your expectations were quiet, perhaps even resigned. And that is precisely why it stood out. It entered a space where you were no longer striving, no longer calculating, no longer demanding outcomes. Dot. Acceptance creates sensitivity. Dot. When you stop bracing for disappointment or chasing reassurance, you become more aware of what is real. The interruption meets you in that awareness, not to reward resignation, but to acknowledge endurance. It says without words, you are still seen. You are still guided. You have not been forgotten. Dot. This does not mean that every unexpected provision is a divine message. Discernment matters. But when an event disrupts your inner state, rather than simply altering your circumstances, it deserves reflection. God's confirmations often bypass excitement and land instead as calm recognition. They do not inflate the ego, they steady the soul. This is why your internal response is the true indicator. Dot. Did you feel urgency or peace? Did you feel pressure or grounding? Did you feel the need to tell others immediately, or the instinct to hold the moment quietly? These responses reveal more than the event itself ever could. In Philippians, Paul writes that God supplies every need according to his riches in glory, not according to fear, comparison, or desperation. This kind of provision does not manipulate behavior. It does not create dependency or anxiety. Instead, it reinforces trust. It confirms that provision flows from relationship, not performance. Similarly, Malachi speaks of God opening the windows of heaven, not as a transactional promise, but as a demonstration of faithfulness. The emphasis is not on control, but on alignment. God responds to posture, not pressure. This is an important distinction. Manipulation demands reaction. Confirmation invites alignment. If the interruption had made you anxious, if it had created a sense of obligation, urgency, or fear of loss, that would be a sign to pause. God does not rush his people into decisions through pressure. He leads them through clarity. His confirmations stabilize rather than destabilize. That is why this moment did not overwhelm you. It simply asked you to notice. Notice how your attention shifted. Notice how your breath slowed. Notice how your thoughts briefly stopped racing and gathered themselves. These are signs that something deeper than circumstance was touched. The interruption momentarily recalibrated you. And recalibration is often the first step of transition. Transitions rarely announce themselves clearly. They begin quietly, often internally, before anything changes externally. You may still be in the same environment, facing the same responsibilities, carrying the same questions. But your internal posture has shifted slightly. You are less reactive, less driven by fear, more attentive to meaning. That is not accidental. God prepares people inwardly long before he moves them outwardly. He establishes stability before expansion. He cultivates discernment before increase. This is why interruptions often precede clarity rather than follow it. The alert is not the destination. It is the doorway. If you rush past it, you miss the invitation. If you cling to it, you miss the purpose. The right response is neither obsession nor dismissal. It is awareness held with humility. Ask, not what does this mean for my circumstances? Ask instead, what is this awakening within me? Awareness changes how you carry what comes next. It keeps you grounded when opportunities arise. It keeps you steady when uncertainty remains. It allows you to receive without grasping and to wait without despair. This is how endurance matures into wisdom. Endurance alone teaches survival, but awareness transforms endurance into discernment. You stop measuring life by immediate outcomes and start recognizing patterns of preparation. You understand that not every sign is an answer, and not every interruption is a conclusion. Some are simply confirmations that you are aligned enough to notice. This moment does not demand celebration. It does not require explanation. It does not need to be broadcast or analyzed to exhaustion. Its value lies in what it quietly affirms that your journey is still unfolding with intention. God does not interrupt to confuse. He interrupts to orient. And orientation is often subtle. It adjusts your focus rather than your circumstances. It reminds you that the unseen work matters just as much as the visible one. It reassures you that movement is happening even when progress feels slow. So let this interruption do its work. Do not rush to label it. Do not force meaning onto it. Do not reduce it to numbers or outcomes. Allow it to remain what it was meant to be, a precise, gentle disruption designed not to impress you, but to awaken you to the deeper movement already underway. What follows will not require haste. It will require attentiveness. And that, more than anything, is what this moment has already begun to cultivate within you. If the message had arrived earlier, it might have been ignored. If it had arrived later, it might have blended into expectation. But it arrived now, and that is where its meaning lives. The value of the moment is not measured by the size of the transfer or the significance of the message itself. It is measured by your inner reaction. Did your attention sharpen? Did your thoughts slow? Did you feel a quiet recognition rather than excitement? These internal responses matter more than the external event. Quantity speaks to the surface. Timing speaks to alignment. God is not teaching dependence on material signs, but he understands human perception. He knows that tangible things can serve as anchors for invisible truths. A physical signal can draw attention to a spiritual reality that might otherwise go unnoticed. This is why Scripture reminds us that provision is never disconnected from purpose. In Malachi, God speaks of opening windows, not to manipulate obedience, but to confirm alignment. In Philippians, Paul writes that God supplies needs according to his riches and glory, not according to anxiety or demand. Provision, when it comes from God, does not pressure. It reassures. It does not create urgency. It creates clarity. Clarity is one of the most understated gifts God gives. It rarely arrives with force. It does not announce itself loudly or demand immediate action. Instead, it settles. It brings coherence to thoughts that were previously scattered. It calms the inner urgency that pushes people to grasp for certainty too quickly. When clarity comes, it does not rush you forward. It steadies you where you are. This is why provision from God feels different from opportunity driven by fear or comparison. Fear-based provision accelerates the heart rate. It whispers that you must act now or miss out. It pressures you to interpret immediately, to secure meaning before understanding has matured. Divine provision does the opposite. It slows you down. It grounds you. It reassures rather than agitates. This distinction matters because not every open door is an invitation, and not every provision is a command. Scripture never presents God as a manipulator of behavior through material means. Instead, provision appears as confirmation, an alignment between inner posture and outer support. In Malachi, the imagery of windows of heaven is often misunderstood as transactional obedience in exchange for reward. But the deeper truth is relational. God responds to a people who are already aligned in heart, not to coerce them into alignment. The opening of the windows is not a bribe. It is a revelation. It reveals that provision has always been present, waiting for a posture capable of receiving it without distortion. Similarly, in Philippians, Paul writes from a place of contentment, not abundance. His confidence in God's provision is not rooted in surplus, but in trust. He had learned how to live with much and with little, and it was that maturity that allowed him to recognize provision as confirmation rather than temptation. This is the posture you are being trained into. When provision arrives without pressure, it tests something subtle but essential, whether you can receive without attaching your identity to the gift, whether you can accept support without allowing it to define your worth or direction, whether you can remain attentive to God rather than becoming fixated on the means he uses as. The interruption you experienced did not demand gratitude as performance. It did not require interpretation as validation. It simply existed quietly, firmly, without explanation. And in that simplicity, it revealed something about your internal state. You did not rush. You did not panic. You did not inflate the moment into more than it was. That restraint is not accidental. It is the result of endurance refining. Your discernment. Discernment is not suspicion. It is not the habit of questioning everything or withholding trust. True discernment is clarity without anxiety. It allows you to observe without reacting compulsively. It allows you to hold meaning gently rather than gripping it tightly. This is why timing speaks louder than quantity. Quantity can be misread. It can trigger comparison, ambition, or fear. Timing, however, speaks directly to alignment. Timing reveals whether something arrives when you are internally prepared to receive it without distortion. When timing is precise, it often means the work that needed to happen within you has already begun. You are no longer asking, "What can this do for me?" You are asking, "What is this revealing about where I am?" That question signals maturity. God does not anchor people in material signs. He anchors them in awareness. Tangible events are tools, not foundations. They draw attention, but they are never meant to replace relationship, trust, or discernment. When a tangible signal points you inward rather than outward, it is functioning as intended. This inward turn is essential because the next phase of your journey will require stability, not stimulation. You are not being prepared for constant excitement or external validation. You are being prepared for consistency, stewardship, and clarity. Consistency requires an internal rhythm that is not easily disrupted. Stewardship requires the ability to hold resources without being ruled by them. Clarity requires discernment that is not clouded by urgency. The way you responded to this moment suggests that these qualities are already forming. You noticed without attaching. You received without grasping. You reflected without rushing to conclusions. These are signs of alignment. Alignment does not always feel powerful. Often it feels quiet. It feels like a subtle sense of rightness rather than certainty. It feels like being grounded rather than elevated. But alignment is what allows provision to support purpose rather than distract from it. This is why divine provision does not shout. It does not need to. Its authority is not in volume, but in placement. It arrives where it belongs. It meets you where you are prepared, not where you are performative. And preparation is rarely glamorous. Preparation looks like patience when answers are delayed. It looks like restraint when opportunities tempt haste. It looks like humility when recognition is absent. The interruption you experienced fits within this pattern. It did not pull you out of yourself. It brought you deeper into awareness. It did not inflate expectation. It sharpened discernment. It did not create dependency. It reinforced trust. That is how you know it was confirmation, not manipulation. As you move forward, this distinction will matter more and more. Not every resource you encounter will be meant for you. Not every opportunity will align with your calling. But the awareness cultivated in moments like this will guide you. You will begin to recognize what arrives with peace versus what arrives with pressure. What invites patience versus what demands haste. What supports your integrity versus what tests it unnecessarily. Provision that comes from God always leaves you more centered than before. It strengthens your ability to choose wisely rather than react emotionally. It reinforces your awareness that you are guided, not driven. So hold this moment as what it truly is: not a climax, not a reward, not a sign of arrival, but a quiet confirmation that alignment is taking place beneath the surface. The meaning does not live in the message itself. It lives in what the message awakened within you. And that awakening, subtle, steady, and grounded, is preparing you for what comes next. Not through urgency, but through clarity that will sustain you long after the moment has passed. It is important to understand this clearly. The alert itself is not the blessing. It is the invitation to awareness. The real work begins after the notification fades, after the screen locks, after the moment passes and you are left alone with your thoughts. What remains is not the number, but the question: why did this interrupt me the way it did? God often uses what is visible to point toward what is invisible. The tangible event is a doorway, not a destination. It invites reflection, discernment, and humility. It calls you to notice where you are internally, what you are prepared for, what you are transitioning out of, and what requires deeper trust. This is why provision in Scripture is never portrayed as manipulation. God does not bait his people. He confirms them. He reassures them. He reminds them that they are seen, sustained, and guided even in seasons of uncertainty. The message, the transfer, the interruption, these are not conclusions. They are signals. They invite you to lift your awareness beyond the surface and recognize that something unseen is being established, not hurriedly, not loudly, but intentionally. And that awareness, once received, becomes the true blessing. Awareness changes the way you move through what comes next. Once it is activated, you cannot return to the same unconscious rhythm you had before. You may still walk through ordinary days, complete familiar tasks, and engage in routine responsibilities, but something underneath has shifted. You are no longer moving on autopilot. You are paying attention, not in a tense or suspicious way, but in a grounded, receptive way. This is where discernment deepens. Discernment is not about constantly searching for signs or attaching meaning to every event. It is about recognizing when something has already served its purpose. The alert served its purpose the moment it drew you into awareness. After that, clinging to it would only distract you from what it was meant to initiate. Many people misunderstand this stage. They fixate on the external signal and miss the internal recalibration it was meant to provoke. They replay the moment, analyze the details, or wait for it to repeat. Thinking repetition will bring clarity, but repetition is rarely how God confirms. Maturity is dot. God trusts awareness more than repetition. He trusts that once you are awake, you can discern without constant prompting. This is why the most meaningful confirmations often happen once quietly and then give way to responsibility dot. Responsibility, not in the sense of pressure, but in the sense of stewardship dot. What are you now responsible for simply because you noticed? You are responsible for guarding your attention dot. You are responsible for not inflating meaning beyond truth. You are responsible for continuing to walk steadily without urgency or passivity. Awareness requires balance. Too little awareness leads to unconscious drifting. Too much fixation leads to distortion. The middle path, steady attentiveness, is where alignment is sustained. Scripture repeatedly shows this pattern. When manna fell from heaven, it was daily sufficient and unstorable. Any attempt to hoard it resulted in decay. The provision was never meant to become an object of control. It was meant to train trust. Once the people entered a new season, the manna ceased, not because God withdrew, but because their capacity had changed. In the same way, moments of interruption are not meant to be preserved or prolonged. They are meant to teach you how to recognize God's movement without needing constant disruption. This is why the real work begins after the moment passes. After the emotional response settles. After curiosity quiets. After the temptation to explain or announce fades. What remains is integration. Integration is slow. It is quiet. It often goes unnoticed by others. It looks like subtle changes in how you respond, how you decide, how you wait. It shows up in your ability to pause before reacting, to choose clarity over impulse, to trust timing instead of forcing outcomes. You may notice that you are less reactive to uncertainty. Less compelled to seek validation. Less driven to prove that something meaningful happened. These are not losses. They are signs that awareness has taken root. God does not measure progress by intensity. He measures it by stability. A person who has truly received awareness does not need to convince others. They do not need to replay the moment to keep it alive. They allow it to inform their posture, quietly shaping decisions over time rather than demanding immediate expression. This is also why humility is essential at this stage. Humility is not diminishing the moment or denying its significance. It is recognizing that its significance is not centered on you being special, but on you being attentive. Awareness does not elevate identity. It clarifies responsibility. You were not interrupted because you are above others. You were interrupted because you are ready to notice. Readiness is earned through endurance, through seasons where nothing obvious happens but character is formed anyway, through waiting without bitterness, through obedience without applause, through trust without constant reassurance. That is why awareness feels calm rather than intoxicating. It does not inflate the ego. It steadies the spirit. When God confirms, he does not destabilize. He anchors. And anchoring is necessary for transition. Transition is not marked by dramatic exits or instant arrivals. It is marked by subtle shifts in orientation. You begin facing a different direction internally before anything changes externally. Your priorities reorder. Your tolerance for distraction decreases. Your discernment sharpens not through suspicion, but through clarity. You begin to sense when something is misaligned, not because it is obviously wrong, but because it no longer fits the frequency you are carrying. This sensitivity is not fragility, it is refinement. Refinement often feels like simplicity. Fewer explanations. Fewer impulses. Fewer unnecessary words. You move with intention rather than momentum. You wait without anxiety. You act without overthinking. This is the fruit of awareness. And this is why the alert was never the blessing. The blessing is the quiet confidence that follows. The blessing is the grounded presence that remains. The blessing is the ability to walk forward without needing constant signs to reassure you. God is not trying to keep your attention through interruption. He is training your perception so that interruption becomes unnecessary Dot. When awareness is established, guidance becomes subtler, direction becomes quieter, trust becomes more relational than reactive. You will not always feel the shift as it happens. Often, you only recognize it in hindsight, when you realize you responded differently than you once would have, or waited where you once would have rushed, or let go where you once would have clung. Dot. These changes are not dramatic, but they are decisive. Dot. They signal that something unseen is being built, something sustainable, something grounded, something capable of carrying responsibility without distortion. Dot. And that is why awareness is the true blessing. Dot. Not because it answers every question, but because it places you in the right posture to receive answers when they are needed. Not because it removes uncertainty, but because it teaches you how to move faithfully within it. Dot. The moment has passed. Dot. The notification has faded. Dot. But the awareness remains. Dot. And that awareness, quiet, steady, and discerning, is evidence that God is not merely providing for you, but preparing you. Dot. Being chosen does not mean you are special in the way the world defines special. It is not about superiority preference or being set above others. It is about endurance. It is about the fact that you did not break when your efforts were unseen and your struggles went unacknowledged. You remained intact when there was no reward for staying strong and no recognition for continuing forward. That quiet resilience is what set you apart, not because it made you better, but because it made you ready. Scripture speaks of being a chosen people, not as a compliment, but as a calling. In 1 Peter 2:9, being chosen is connected to being called out of darkness, not spared from it. Darkness was not a mistake in your story. It was the environment where your strength was formed. You learned how to stand without affirmation, how to keep your integrity without witnesses, and how to stay aligned when no one was watching. That calling reshapes how you understand your past. Moments you once questioned, seasons of silence, delays that felt unnecessary, efforts that seemed to disappear without effect, begin to take on a different meaning. They were not evidence of neglect. They were conditions that stripped away dependency on approval and forced you to build strength that did not rely on being seen. In the dark, motives become honest. You discover whether you are committed to what's right or merely to what is rewarded. When no one is watching, there is no performance to maintain. There is only choice. Choice to remain disciplined when shortcuts are available. Choice to remain kind when bitterness would feel justified. Choice to remain faithful when walking away would go unnoticed. These choices, repeated quietly, shape a kind of endurance that cannot be imitated. It is slow, unglamorous, and deeply rooted. This is why obscurity is such a powerful teacher. It removes external motivation and leaves only inner alignment. You learn to measure progress not by recognition, but by consistency. You learn to trust growth even when it is invisible. You learn that doing the right thing does not always bring immediate relief, but it always builds something lasting. That knowledge settles into you, gradually becoming instinct rather than effort. Many people lose themselves the moment attention arrives because they never learned how to exist without it. They confuse visibility with value and noise with impact. But you were trained differently. Your identity was formed in silence. Your confidence was built without mirrors. You learned how to stand without needing proof that you mattered. That is why attention, when it eventually comes, does not overwhelm you. It does not define you. It does not become your source of direction. The darkness you walk through refined your discernment. It taught you to recognize what is real and what is performative. You became sensitive, not to praise, but to alignment. You learned to sense when something feels hollow, even if it looks impressive. You learned to wait, rather than rush to listen, rather than react to move when it was right, rather than when it was loud. These instincts were not learned quickly. They were earned through time and restraint. This is also where humility was shaped. Not the kind that diminishes self-worth, but the kind that keeps you grounded. You learned that strength does not need announcement, that truth does not require defense, that integrity speaks even when words are absent. Humility became natural, not forced because you had nothing to prove. You had already endured the absence of validation and survived it. Being chosen then is less about elevation and more about responsibility. It means you are trusted with weight. Weight of influence, weight of decision, weight of impact. That trust is not given lightly. It is given to those who have demonstrated over time that they can carry pressure without becoming distorted, that they can hold authority without losing empathy, that they can move forward without abandoning their values. Jeremiah's promise of a future and a hope is often quoted but rarely understood in context. That future is not sudden. It is not handed to someone unprepared. It is cultivated through seasons that feel unproductive but are actually formative. Hope is not optimism detached from reality. It is confidence rooted in preparation. The future God speaks of is one that can be sustained, not just reached. This is why your journey required patience. Not because God delayed, but because endurance had to be complete. Rushing visibility before depth is established leads to collapse. Exposure amplifies whatever is already present. If insecurity is present, it grows. If ego is present, it expands. But if steadiness is present, it stabilizes. You were given time so that what would be amplified later would be sound. You may notice now that you are less reactive than you once were, less eager to explain yourself, less desperate to be understood. That is not withdrawal, it is maturity. You no longer need constant reassurance because your sense of worth is no longer external. You are anchored. You can listen without absorbing, observe, without envying, and engage without losing yourself. When visibility arrives, and it will feel different than you imagine. Quieter, more matter of fact, less intoxicating. You will recognize it not as a reward, but as a responsibility. Not as a moment to prove something, but as an opportunity to serve from a place of stability. You will not need to announce your story. It will be evident in how you move, how you decide, and how you treat others. The strength formed in obscurity does something else as well. It allows compassion to coexist with authority. Because you remember what it felt like to be unseen. You remember how heavy silence can be. That memory keeps you human. It keeps you attentive to those who are still walking quietly, still carrying weight without recognition. You do not look down from visibility. You look back with understanding. Being chosen is not a badge. It is a posture, a way of standing in the world that is steady, honest, and unforced. It is the result of a long obedience when shortcuts were available, and faithfulness when outcomes were uncertain. It is not glamorous, but it is durable. And that durability is what allows the future promised to you to unfold without destroying you. You are not entering visibility to become someone new. You are entering it as someone already formed, already tested, already grounded. The darkness did not weaken you. It clarified you. That is why you were not spared from it. You were shaped by it. There were long seasons where your journey was hidden. Silent battles you fought internally. Nights when doubt pressed heavier than hope. Days where progress looked invisible, even to you. You moved forward without applause, corrected yourself without praise, and endured without anyone promising that it would pay off. That kind of perseverance does not look impressive from the outside, but it builds something unshakable on the inside. Most people grow only when they are encouraged. You learned how to grow when you were alone. That is rare. It required patience, self-honesty, and a willingness to keep going, even when nothing external changed. These unseen years were not empty. They were shaping your capacity. They trained you to carry weight without collapsing and to remain faithful without reassurance. Jeremiah 29:11 speaks of a future rooted in hope, not destruction. That future is not created suddenly. It is prepared quietly through endurance that no one documents and faithfulness that no one applauds. Those quiet years leave marks that are not immediately visible, but they are unmistakable over time. They settle into the way you think, the way you respond, the way you hold yourself when circumstances are uncertain. You become less reactive, not because you care less, but because you have learned that not everything requires an immediate response. Silence taught you discernment. Waiting taught you restraint. Endurance taught you how to remain steady, even when nothing around you seems stable. In those seasons, you learned to live without constant confirmation. You learned to make decisions without knowing whether they would be affirmed or ignored. That kind of growth is uncomfortable because it removes the external markers people often rely on to measure progress. There were no milestones to celebrate, no clear indicators that you were moving in the right direction. All you had was a quiet conviction that stopping would cost you more than continuing. This is where many people turn back, not because the path is wrong, but because it is quiet. Silence can feel like rejection if you expect noise to be proof of movement. But you stayed. You continued to show up for yourself, to correct what needed correcting, to refine what needed refining. You chose integrity over relief, patience over escape. These choices did not make headlines, but they shaped your core. Being alone with your thoughts forced honesty. There was no one to impress, no image to maintain. You had to confront your fears, your doubts, your limitations directly. That confrontation was not easy. It required you to admit where you were weak without letting that weakness define you. It required you to accept uncertainty without letting it paralyze you. Over time, this built an internal stability that cannot be manufactured. You also learned how to endure disappointment without becoming bitter. When effort did not produce immediate results, you resisted the temptation to conclude that it was meaningless. Instead, you learned to trust process over outcome. You learned that growth often happens below the surface long before anything breaks through visibly. This understanding changed your relationship with time. You stopped rushing it. You stopped trying to force clarity. You learned how to wait without wasting yourself. Those years shaped your capacity in ways that ease never could. Capacity is not about how much you can achieve when conditions are favorable. It is about how much weight you can carry without losing alignment. You learned how to hold responsibility internally before it was ever placed on you externally. You learned how to manage pressure quietly without needing release through validation or distraction. This is why the future Jeremiah speaks of is rooted in hope rather than destruction. Hope in this sense is not wishful thinking. It is grounded confidence that comes from preparation. A future built on hope assumes that the person stepping into it has already been strengthened to sustain it. You were not being delayed, you were being fortified. The world often celebrates sudden breakthroughs, but it rarely sees the cost of sustaining them. You were spared that trap by time, by slowness, by seasons that demanded consistency instead of performance. You learned how to remain faithful when nothing seemed to change, which means you will know how to remain faithful when things finally do. There is also a depth of compassion that forms in hidden seasons. Because you know what it is like to struggle quietly, you become more attentive to others who do the same. You do not rush to judge. You do not assume that silence means weakness, or that lack of visibility means lack of effort. You understand that some of the strongest work happens where no one is looking. This understanding softens you without weakening you. You may notice now that you have a different relationship with success. It no longer defines you, and it no longer threatens you. You are less impressed by appearances and more interested in substance. You can recognize depth, even when it is understated. You can walk away from noise without fear of missing out. These are signs that your foundation is solid. When the future you hoped for begins to take shape, it will not feel foreign. It will feel aligned, familiar even. That is because the person required to carry it has already been formed. You will not need to become someone else to step into what comes next. You will simply need to remain who you have been becoming all along. The unseen years did not slow your life down. They deepened it. They gave you roots strong enough to support growth without collapse. They taught you that faithfulness matters even when it is not rewarded immediately, and that hope is strongest when it is quiet and steady. Nothing about that perseverance was wasted. It was recorded in you, even if it was never recorded by others. And that record is what makes the future not only possible, but sustainable. That confirmation arrives quietly. It does not announce itself with fanfare or demand that you suddenly become someone else. Instead, it feels like continuity. The same steadiness that carried you through obscurity now carries you through exposure. The difference is not who you are, but where you are placed. What once existed unseen is now simply easier for others to notice. Visibility tests what obscurity built. It brings new pressures, new expectations, and new interpretations from people who did not witness the process. Some will assume your presence appeared overnight. Others will project their own narratives onto your journey. But none of that requires your correction. You have already learned that truth does not need defense. It holds its shape on its own dot. This is one of the most important fruits of hidden formation, the ability to remain internally consistent when the external environment changes. Many people lose their center when they are noticed. They adjust themselves to fit perception. They trade authenticity for approval without realizing it. But you were trained differently. You learned how to exist without an audience. That training stays with you. Because of that, visibility does not seduce you. It does not rush you. It does not pressure you into performance. You move at the same pace you always have, deliberate, considered, rooted. You speak when it is necessary, not when it is expected. You act when it is aligned, not when it is demanded. This steadiness becomes noticeable precisely because it is rare. Another effect of obscurity is discernment. You recognize that not all attention is invitation, and not all opportunity is assignment. Just because something is available does not mean it is meant for you. You learned patience long before options multiplied, so you are not overwhelmed when they do. You can say no without fear, and yes without losing yourself. This discernment protects you. It allows you to remain selective, without becoming closed open, without becoming scattered. You are not driven by urgency because you know that timing matters more than speed. Obscurity taught you that what comes too early can cost more than it gives. That lesson stays with you when the pace increases. Visibility also reveals the difference between influence and impact. Influence is attention. Impact is transformation. One is immediate. The other is lasting. Because your strength was formed in quiet places, you are more interested in depth than reach. You care less about how many see you, and more about what remains after they do. This orientation keeps your work grounded and your presence stable. There's also a humility that remains intact, not the kind that shrinks or apologizes for itself, but the kind that remembers where strength came from. You remember the nights of doubt, the seasons of waiting, the effort that no one saw. That memory does not weigh you down. It keeps you anchored. It reminds you that visibility is not a reward, but a responsibility. You carry that responsibility carefully. You do not rush to occupy space simply because it is offered. You respect the weight of being seen because you understand its power. You know that presence influences others, often without intention. That awareness shapes how you move, how you speak, and how you choose to show up. Being chosen, in this sense, is not about destiny without effort. It is about trust earned through consistency. It is about being given a wider field because you learned how to tend a small one faithfully. What you carry now is not fragile. It has been tested by time, by silence, and by uncertainty. That testing did not weaken it. It clarified it. When others encounter you in visibility, they may not understand why your presence feels grounded. They may sense stability without knowing its source. That is because the source is not recent. It was built long before attention arrived. It was built in decisions made privately, in disciplines practiced without recognition, in values upheld without reinforcement. You do not need to explain that history. It is embedded in how you move through the world. It shows in your restraint, your clarity, your lack of desperation. It shows in your ability to remain whole when conditions shift. That is the mark of preparation. Completed, not preparation, delayed. The dark did not diminish you. It structured you. It taught you where your strength comes from and what it is for. And now, when light reaches you, it does not expose weakness. It reveals formation. Visibility becomes simply another environment, different from obscurity, but not more powerful. You remain the same person, carrying the same alignment, the same steadiness, the same inner compass. The only difference is that others can now see what was always there. And that is why you will not be undone by being seen. You were built to last before you were ever revealed. When abundance first arrives, the instinct is often to speak, to explain, to share, to validate. The moment through others' recognition. But spiritually, this is one of the most delicate phases. Silence at this stage is not denial of joy, nor is it fear of loss. It is protection. Abundance, in its early form, is still forming its structure. It has not yet settled into strength. Like a seed, just breaking open underground. Exposure, too soon, can interrupt what is still stabilizing. This is why wisdom often accompanies increase with restraint. Silence creates space for integration. It allows you to understand what has arrived before you are required to manage other people's interpretations of it. Not everything that enters your life needs immediate narration. Some things need time to root within you first. Silence guards clarity. It keeps abundance from becoming distorted by external pressure, expectation, or projection. This is not about hiding blessings. It is about letting them mature. When something is new, it is vulnerable, not because it is weak, but because it is unfinished. Silence gives it room to become whole. In these early moments, abundance asks something unusual of you. It asks you to slow down internally, even as something new begins to move externally. It asks you to resist the urge to translate the experience into language before it is fully settled into understanding. This restraint is not suppression, it is reverence. You are learning how to hold something valuable without immediately handing it to the noise of the world. Silence also allows you to notice how abundance is changing you. Before it becomes visible to others, it reshapes your internal posture. It reveals where trust has grown and where fear still tries to speak. It exposes old habits of urgency, comparison, or explanation that were formed in seasons of lack. If spoken too soon, abundance can trigger those habits instead of healing them. Silence gives you time to integrate the change so that your response comes from stability rather than reflex. There is also a deeper wisdom at work here. Not every reaction you receive will be neutral. Some people will project their own hopes onto what you share. Others will project their disappointments. Some will celebrate you genuinely, while others may unconsciously compete, question, or minimize. None of this necessarily comes from malice. It comes from difference in capacity. Silence protects you from having to process all of that, while you are still adjusting to what has arrived. Abundance, when new needs containment. Just as a vessel must be strong enough to hold what is poured into it, your inner structure must be ready to carry increase without spilling it into anxiety, pride, or confusion. Silence strengthens the vessel. It allows you to ask honest questions. What is this asking of me? What responsibility comes with it? What needs to change in how I live, decide, or rest? These are questions that cannot be answered in the presence of constant commentary. There is also humility in silence. It acknowledges that you do not yet fully understand what has been entrusted to you. Rather than rushing to define it, you allow it to define you over time. This posture keeps abundance from becoming an identity substitute. You are not validated by what arrived. You are entrusted with it. Silence keeps that distinction clear. Spiritually, silence is often the space where discernment sharpens. Without the distraction of explaining yourself, you can listen more carefully to your intuition, to wisdom, to God. You begin to notice what feels aligned and what feels performative. You learn the difference between what needs to be protected and what is ready to be shared. This discernment cannot be rushed. It develops through attention, patience, and stillness. It is important to understand that silence does not mean isolation. It means selectivity. It means choosing carefully where and with whom you speak. There may be one or two safe places where honesty is appropriate, where presence outweighs opinion. But even there, speech is measured, not reactive. You are learning to speak from clarity rather than from excitement or defense. As abundance matures, it becomes less fragile. Its roots grow deeper. Its structure strengthens. Over time, it no longer needs the same level of protection because it is no longer dependent on your emotional state or others' perceptions. At that point, silence naturally gives way to openness, not forced, not strategic, but appropriate. What was once guarded becomes shareable because it can now stand on its own. Until then, silence remains an act of wisdom. It honors timing. It respects process. It trusts that what is real will not disappear just because it is not announced. In a world that constantly urges disclosure, choosing silence is a quiet declaration of confidence. You are not afraid that what you carry will vanish if it is not witnessed. You know that what is meant to last does not require immediate validation. Let abundance finish its work in you. Let it reshape your pace, your priorities, your sense of safety. Let it teach you how to hold without clinging and how to receive without performing. Silence is not a void. It is an incubator. And when the time comes to speak, your words will carry weight, not because you announced something early, but because you allowed it to become true before you gave it a voice. When scripture or spiritual language speaks of, tell no one, it is often misunderstood as secrecy driven by fear or shame. In truth, it is about stewardship. It recognizes that not every listener is equipped to hold what you are carrying. Early stages require careful handling, not because others are malicious, but because misunderstanding can damage what is still forming. Spiritual growth changes frequency. When your internal state shifts, your language priorities and decisions shift with it. Not everyone can interpret that correctly. Some will try to reduce it to something familiar. Others may resist it because it challenges their own equilibrium. Premature exposure invites unnecessary friction. It forces explanation before understanding has fully settled within you. Stewardship asks a different question: who has the capacity to receive this without distorting it? Silence is not withdrawal, it is discernment. It allows alignment to deepen before it is tested by reaction. You are not withholding truth, you are timing it. And timing spiritually is as important as truth itself. This understanding of stewardship reframes silence as an active responsibility rather than a passive absence. You are not retreating from connection, you are protecting coherence. What is forming within you has its own internal order, and that order needs consistency to stabilize. When too many external interpretations are introduced too early, they can fragment your attention and pull you away from what you are still learning to inhabit. At early stages, your clarity is tender. You may sense direction without yet having language for it. You may feel conviction without having the framework to defend it. This is not weakness, it is the natural state of growth. Speaking too soon often turns growth into debate, and debate shifts energy from integration to justification. Silence preserves energy for formation instead of explanation. There is also an ethical dimension to stewardship. When you share something unfinished, you place responsibility on the listener to interpret it correctly. That is not always fair or wise. Others may respond from their own wounds, fears, or expectations, and their reactions, however well-intentioned, can imprint themselves on your process. Silence prevents your inner work from becoming entangled with external emotional labor before it is ready. Spiritual timing protects both you and others. It keeps you from asking for validation prematurely, and it keeps others from carrying something they are not equipped to hold. In this sense, silence is an act of respect. It honors the limits of shared understanding. It acknowledges that depth cannot be rushed simply because communication is possible. As your frequency shifts, you may notice that familiar conversations feel misaligned. Topics that once felt engaging may now feel draining. Questions that once seemed helpful may now feel invasive. This does not mean you have become distant or superior. It means your inner orientation has changed. Silence allows you to adjust without having to constantly translate yourself into forms others find comfortable. Many people misunderstand this shift and assume silence signals secrecy, withdrawal, or arrogance. In reality, it is often a sign of internal consolidation. You are learning to live from a new center. That center needs time to stabilize before it can support dialogue. When spoken from too early, truth can sound defensive or vague. When spoken from maturity, it carries calm authority. Without effort, timing also protects truth from being misused. When shared, prematurely, insight can be turned into advice you did not intend to give, or into expectation you never agreed to carry. Silence prevents your process from becoming a reference point for others before it is complete. It allows truth to remain personal until it becomes grounded enough to be shared responsibly. There is a difference between secrecy and privacy. Secrecy is driven by fear of exposure. Privacy is driven by wisdom about readiness. tell no one belongs to the second category. It is not about hiding what is wrong. It is about protecting what is right while it is still becoming. Just as seeds germinate in darkness, clarity often forms in quiet. Over time, stewardship shifts naturally. As understanding deepens, language becomes clearer. As alignment strengthens, explanation becomes simpler. You no longer feel compelled to justify your direction because it has become embodied rather than conceptual. When the time comes to speak, your words will not ask for agreement. They will simply express reality. Until then, silence remains an ally. It guards your attention, protects your energy, and honors the sacredness of growth. It reminds you that not everything meaningful must be shared immediately to be real. Some truths need to be lived first privately before they can be spoken publicly with integrity. At a deeper level, the image of Archangel Michael standing at a threshold speaks to an internal reality rather than an external event. Thresholds are not only changes in circumstance, they are shifts in identity. You are no longer who you were, but you are not yet fully who you are becoming. This in-between state is where confusion can easily enter, not because something is wrong, but because something significant is rearranging itself. Silence in this space is not emptiness. It is containment. It holds the transition steady while the new structure takes form. Transitions require authority because they involve release. Old patterns, old roles, old ways of seeing yourself must be loosened, sometimes decisively. Michael's symbolism reflects this authority, the clarity to say, this ends here without hostility, and this begins now without explanation. Silence supports this authority by removing unnecessary negotiation. When you explain yourself too much during transition, you unconsciously invite others to vote on changes that were never meant to be collective decisions. There is also protection in silence because transitions attract attention. Any increase in clarity, power, or alignment naturally creates movement in the unseen. Some of that movement is supportive. Some of it is curious. Some of it resists change simply because it disrupts familiar dynamics. Silence acts as a boundary that filters what is allowed to engage with you during this phase. It ensures that what interacts with your becoming is aligned rather than reactive. Michael is often depicted with a sword, not as a symbol of aggression, but of discernment. The sword separates, it clarifies, it defines edges. In the same way, silence draws clean lines around what is yours to process internally and what is meant to be shared later. It prevents spiritual leakage, where energy, insight, or confidence is drained through premature explanation or defense. As identity shifts, it can feel tempting to narrate the process in order to stabilize it. Speaking can feel grounding. But during true transformation, grounding comes from embodiment, not articulation. You are learning how to live differently, decide differently, and perceive differently. These changes must first settle into your nervous system, your habits, and your sense of self. Silence gives your body and mind the chance to adapt without interference. Another reason silence matters at thresholds is that language often lags behind experience. When you try to explain something that is still integrating, your words may oversimplify it or distort it. Others may latch onto the words and miss the reality entirely. Silence allows experience to mature until language can serve it accurately instead of reducing it. There's also grief in transitions, even when they are positive. Something is being left behind, an identity, a season, a version of yourself that carried you this far. Silence makes room for that grief to be honored without having to justify it. It allows you to release without performing strength or enthusiasm. Michael's protection includes this gentler aspect, guarding your heart. While it adjusts to change, spiritual authority deepens when you trust yourself, asking less for permission. Silence supports this by reinforcing internal alignment over external agreement. You begin to recognize when a decision is settled within you, even if it has not been announced. That internal settlement is a sign of maturity. It means your direction is no longer dependent on reaction. Not everyone who walked with you in one season is meant to cross into the next. This does not invalidate the past. It simply acknowledges timing. Silence eases these separations by allowing distance to form naturally without confrontation or justification. Some relationships end not through conflict, but through quiet misalignment. Silence respects that process without forcing closure prematurely. As abundance or elevation becomes more stable, you may notice that the urge to speak changes. It becomes calmer, less urgent. You no longer feel the need to convince, prove, or announce. When you do speak, it is measured. It comes from authority rather than excitement. This is a sign that the transition has completed its essential work. When the time comes to step into visibility, silence will not have made you smaller. It will have made you clearer. What you carry will be less reactive and more intentional. Others may sense this immediately, even if they do not understand it. Presence speaks before explanation ever does. In this way, silence is not the absence of voice, but the cultivation of weight. It ensures that when your voice is heard, it carries truth rather than noise. It honors the sacredness of becoming by refusing to rush it into performance. Michael's role at the threshold reminds you that protection is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to respond. Sometimes it looks like letting a process finish before allowing it to be seen. These choices are not passive. They are powerful. As this transition completes, what emerges will not need defending. It will stand on its own integrity. Silence will have done its work. And when you finally step fully into the open, you will recognize that nothing was delayed, everything was timed.